Welcome to Be the Good with Kate, the show where guests leave you inspired to uncover your passions and discover tangible ways to make a difference along the way. I'm your host, Kate Chericello-Tente, and here I talk to individuals who are doing just that. Individuals from all walks of life and industries following their passions and making the world a better place while they do. With guests hailing from Bali to Utah, Florida to Japan, and just about everywhere in between, something I love about human connection and inspiration is how you certainly don't need to be from the same place or a similar background to get so much out of hearing from a person. In fact, I think it is better that way. We notice how we as humans are so similar in so many ways, and how each of us has so much power to make a difference in our own lives and the lives of others. I hope you're inspired here to start, restart, or continue your journey of finding your passions and helping others along the way. I love a text saying, "This made me think of you today." If there is someone in your life who could use today's story, click share and send their way. And thank you for helping to inspire more people. Now onto this week's episode. Let's spread a little more goodness in the world. Welcome back to Be the Good with Kate. And today I'm so happy to bring to you Harry Duran. We touched base, it seems like forever ago now, but I was so grateful to be a part of his podcast Junkies. I was episode 315, and I just listened to it again the other day, which was so fun to revisit. And Harry's here now. Here is a bit about Harry from his official bio. He is the founder of FullCast, a full-service done-for-you podcast production and marketing consultancy. He is a heart-led entrepreneur who specializes in being a conduit for awakened and conscious souls ready to broadcast their genius in a way that radically transforms their audience's lives at a global and cosmic level. And right there is kind of the crux of what I think is so neat about Harry. It's like, yes, he does amazing things as a business person, helping other businesses and podcasters, but he is just such an interesting person. And that's why I can't wait for you to hear from him. But let me just give you a little bit more about him in case we don't touch upon it. Harry has 20 plus years of corporate marketing experience. He started podcast Junkies in 2014. He's subsequently hosted and launched 3 additional shows, including the #1 ranked vertical farming podcast. He's interviewed over 400 guests, and through his agency FullCast has helped over 110 clients launch their shows. I could go on, but Harry, I want to hear from you. So thanks for being here today.
Well, thanks again, Kate, for the opportunity to come on and share a bit of my story. It's funny how those numbers change over time because, I'm at 350 with Podcast Junkies, and now combined over both shows, it's now 500 interviews. It's crazy. Time just keeps on going, but it's a wonderful opportunity. And I think when I first started the show in 2014, I don't think I had an idea of like what it would become and how it would drastically change my life. But when I look back, having celebrated 10 years last April, I realized it's one of the most important decisions I ever made to actually start the show.
So tell me about that moment that you decided to start it. And I ask specifically because a lot of listeners do have that idea in their head, and sometimes we're scared to take the first steps.
So I think what was interesting for me is that one of my earliest passions is house music, DJing. So I grew up DJing. If you could pan over to the left, you'd see my turntables are set up in my office.
Fantastic.
So every chance that I get to jam out a little. But it's one of the things that like really light me up, like going out dancing in clubs when I was young and DJing as well. And so I initially thought I was working on a mobile app with a friend of mine called Know Your DJ in 2012 or 13ish, and I thought I was going to start a podcast to interview DJs. And then I went to New Media Expo in Las Vegas in 2014, in January 2014. And then I saw other podcasters there, Amy Porterfield, Pat Flynn, Cliff Ravenscraft, all these folks that I was listening to to learn more about like digital marketing. And I quickly pivoted. Someone came up, mentioned the idea of being a podcast junkie, and I'm like, that's what I am, because I had like 30 on my phone at the time. So I quickly got back home. The domain was available, which is, I'm a big fan of like domains that speak specifically to your show. With Vertical Farming Podcast, I have verticalfarmingpodcast.com as a domain available. So I came back and I realized it'll be much easier and much more fun to interview podcasters as opposed to DJs because they're globetrotting and I'm never going to be able to track them down. And I realized it was my way of learning more about the industry. And so obviously podcasters tend to have good mic setups. And so I started that off on the right foot. And I quickly realized that I wanted to do video from day one. So I had to piece together. In the beginning, those early days, we didn't have Zoom back then. We had Skype with call recorder. So it was video that wasn't recorded, but I could see the person and it was just recording the audio. But what I loved about it was the ability to have that one-to-one connection with my guest. And I could see body language. And I really quickly over the years just learned the importance of how to be a good interviewer. I was listening to Tim Ferrisses of the world, Jordan Harbingers of the world, all these people that were just I looked up to in the podcasting space. And I just learned how to be a better listener, ask open-ended questions, to pull threads, to just be naturally curious. And it's really a skill that I've developed over the past decade, which allowed me to create the second show and multiple shows after that. But I think it's made me a better listener. And I sometimes see how some of that translates into the real world when I'm talking to someone in a conversation and I start asking them questions about like, well, why'd you do that, Kate? And my podcaster hat goes on automatically. But I've always been conscious. I always say, and I tell students and clients this, in a podcast conversation, there's three people present. There's the host, there's the guest, and the listener. And listener singular, like one person is listening to us right now at this or watching us at this moment. And I'm always conscious of that because I think sometimes people come in from like public speaking or radio and they're like, hey, everyone, like they're on stage. But really, this is really an intimate medium. People have got their earbuds in and they're just listening to us have this conversation.
That's really great advice too, with, again, from podcasts or like you just said, with in real life, that also applies, that idea of the one person when you're writing an article or as a teacher, or there's so many places that applies. It's something I loved about you mentioning the listening. This is coming, your episode will probably be just a couple weeks after this one I'm referencing. I had a guest named Jennifer Apple who comes from an acting standpoint of life. And she talked about how important listening is in acting and how that applies to real life. So again, these qualities that cross industries and we do, makes us better people every day.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what was interesting for me, if I think back, I talk about helping people find their voice with podcasting, right? And I think back to an experience I had years ago. And I talk about this because I've been able to piece this story together because I've had experience with public speaking and they ask you like, what big stories happened or what big changes happened in your life to get you to this point right now? And obviously you don't think of it in the moment, but many years ago, I had relocated to Atlanta to work with a half brother of mine. That didn't pan out, family business and all. So I had to go back home to New York with my tail between my legs to go live with my folks. I think it was like at 34 at the time. But I had a ticket to go visit a friend in Thailand. And so I went to fly there just to kind of get my mind off things. He picked me up on a scooter. We drove around the island and then we went up to this beautiful waterfall that he had wanted to show me. And so when we were at the top of the waterfall, he was on a lookout point. He said, come over here, check out the view from where I am. I was like, sure. And I walked into a stream that was right in front of me. I was barefoot. What I didn't realize is how slippery those rocks would be underneath. Both my legs go up in the air. I land on my back and I proceed to be carried to the edge of the waterfall. This is happening in like seconds, Kate. It's so fast. And it was like, I had like no control. My body was totally being carried to the edge. Out of the corner of my eye, I spotted a boulder on the bank. I stuck out my left foot, and which stopped me from like going over the falls. I don't know that I would have died, but it would have been extremely painful. And mind you, I was on Koh Samui in Thailand, some random place in 2004. It wouldn't have ended well. But I don't know like how everything just panned out so quickly that rock was there, and I guess it just wasn't my time. My friend Heiko, his eyes were like wide as saucers. He pulled me over at some point because I think he was thinking at the time, what was I going to do? I was going to jump on him or something. It just was so quick. Needless to say, I was a bit shaken up. We managed to make it through the day, managed to make it through the week, and I got back to New York, and then just months would go by, and then just thinking through, like I would always have flashbacks of that incident. And as I started to learn about, this idea of podcasting and just learning about the importance of past events, I realized, wow, how sad it would be if I died with my voice inside me. And I thought about that, like, wow, like, I had so much knowing, what's happened since then. I've had so much more to say, and I've helped so many people like find their voice. And now it's like that's sort of been the mantra. Like when I work with people, like I know that everyone listening and watching right now has a voice inside them that needs to be heard. I don't care like who it is or where you're at. If you think you don't have an interesting life or you think there's nothing that dramatic, there's something about your story that's gonna impact someone else. And whether it's just one person, and they tell speakers this on stage, like all you need to do is like affect one person, or if someone's listening right now, just affect that one person. And I'm just adamant about like helping people get their voices heard because I think I believe that we're all here on this planet to share our journeys, the good, the bad, the highs, the lows, like all the stuff that's not pretty that you don't see on the on Facebook and, and the Instagram reels. And I think it's just allowing people to be more comfortable with sharing those stories because there's people that need to hear it.
Oh, thank you for sharing all of that. And that was so on point too about the stories. Just from my own experience having this show, the amount of people that come on, sometimes if I don't know them ahead of time, there have been some that I see the resume or I'm connected somehow. I'm like, yes, this is exactly the person for the show. And then there are others where I'm like, I'm not 100% sure, but maybe, like, have you had this experience? And then you start talking to the person, you're like, wow, we are all as in the greater human population, so connected in so many ways and so alike in so many ways. And just hearing from different perspectives is incredible, especially when those perspectives somehow tie in to your own perspectives. And the amount of times that I've seen something from a different light or just learned about an industry I didn't know about, I mean, it's incredible. And you have like triple or quadruple the amount of people I've had on your shows. So I can only imagine you have similar experiences.
Yeah, it's really this function of being interested in the person that's sitting across from you, whether it's virtually or in person. And I think as podcasters, I always tell clients and students like when you book a interview for your show, when you see that on your calendar, you should be excited. You should be, oh my God, I can't wait to have a conversation with Kate, and I'm looking forward to it. If you ever get to the point where you're not excited about an upcoming interview, you're probably burned out, or maybe you're not thinking through like about who you want because really like who I invite on the show is a reflection of the experience I want my listeners to have. Like I always have to be conscious of like my listener. Like I said earlier, it's the host, the guest, and the listener, and I want them to experience what I'm experiencing through the conversation. And so if I'm naturally curious, if I pull threads, I'm almost the proxy for my listener and saying this is probably something that they would want me to ask, anyway. And it's really just trying to get to the root of the superficial answer sometimes that people give you because they'll give you an answer and you're like that doesn't seem like the right answer. Why'd you do that? And then I heard someone describe it as the five whys. Like if you ask them why repeatedly, if they give you an answer and you're like, well, but why'd you do that? And they'll give you another answer and you're like, but why'd you do that? You'll start getting to tears and like really core beliefs pretty quickly, and people will be like, "Oh, my mother like didn't really love
Yeah.
me," or something like that. And you're like, "Okay, let's talk about that." And nothing is off limits. Obviously, I'll respect people's in terms of what they want to share. But if they open up, and I'm like, would you mind if we went deeper into that? And a lot of times, when you hear your guests say, "I don't think I've ever told anyone this
Yes.
before," but you're like, okay, that's when you like resist the urge to jump in. You be comfortable with silence. I've had people tell me some amazing stories, and they'll take these dramatic pauses, and I'm just like, keep my mouth shut. I'm like, if it goes too long, I can always edit out the silence, but I'm just like, just give them the space, because a lot of times people are just trying to understand whether they're in a safe space.
And that again, talk about skills or just things to think about in real life. That idea of getting past the, hey, how you doing? It's like, well, how are you doing? And then waiting for that response. That's just such a great point. I love it as the five whys. That's a wonderful way to frame it. And Harry, your Substack, your newsletter is called A Life Worth Living. I love that title. Can you tell us more about how you came up with that, why you decided on that?
Yeah, it's interesting because obviously, if I'm in the digital marketing world, you always have this idea of like everyone telling you, oh, you got to have a marketing newsletter and you got to communicate to people. So I had one for many years and it wasn't really getting much traction. I think I had about 1,000 subscribers. And then I started following this guy named Dan Coe. And he's sort of like, he's really big in the space now, but he just built his following, I think, in 2020, just off Twitter posts and just sharing his stories. And eventually became like super big. But he's the one who just kind of reminded me of this idea of sharing your journey. And I was like, you know what? What feels more authentic to me is to start talking about what's happening in my world. So I rebranded it to A Life Worth Living, and I moved it over to, I think, initially Beehive and now Substack. And it just feels more natural. I tried it for a while. I was really consistent. I got a newsletter out every Saturday, and then I dropped off for a while. But then I re-engaged, and I did send one out already, one this year. So I'm trying to get back onto that weekly cadence. But it's really more of a personal journal of saying like, hey, we just got five chickens, or hey, like this is happening in my world, or this is the story of how like I got fired from my first job, or just it's really not. There is a call to action at the end, like like what I call my marketing coach calls a super signature at the bottom. Hey, when you're ready, here's some ways I might help you podcasting. But it's very like not in your face. It's the difference of like when you go to a clothing store and you have the person come up to you and say, "Can I help you with that?" And you're like,
Right.
"No, I'm good," as opposed to like, "Hey, I'll be here in the corner if you need me." You know,
Yes.
so there's a different energy around that. But that allowed me to just relax and just say like whatever's happening. And a lot of times it's like talking about the things that are rattling around in my head about stuff that's happening with, at home or stuff I'm thinking about. And I try to be just open and just really vulnerable there because it feels like a safe space and I've gotten some really good feedback. And I think the Substack platform lends itself well to that format because when you see the types of content that's on there, there are some marketing type, emails and newsletters on there, but for the most part, it's really people, being genuine. And it's a really like, it's got a community feature, it's got a notes feature, and it's you can be notified when people comment or subscribe to your stuff, which is hard to see on other platforms. And every time I see a subscriber or anytime I see someone like in my notifications, I immediately go in there and I just like send them a little message. I'm like, "Hey, Kate, thanks for the subscription. Every little bit helps." And so
Yeah.
it's been a nice opportunity and a nice platform for me to just be a bit more relaxed.
That's really cool. I didn't know too much about the platform other than just, seeing newsletters on it. And I love that you commented about how you can just be you and give your stories. And because don't we want to work with people who we can relate to, who we know about, who we know their why and
Yeah.
why they're doing this. And something else I like in your Substack, I wrote it down because I knew I'd forget the wording. Oh, how you said for you and with how you help with businesses. And for some reason that just stuck out to me. I love that concept of we're working together, or I can sit back and then you do the work for me. I just kind of like that. Do you have a preference? Do you love collaborating? Do you love taking the ownership and just doing it yourself? Like, how did this all kind of come about?
I think the origin really is just the idea of making it more accessible to folks. Because when I started the agency, I was like, well, there's, just business owners that want me to do everything for them. So that's our done
Mhm.
for you approach. And literally, we assume clients are starting at zero. So it's everything about like the name of the show, description, cover art, music, intros, outros, gear, like how you set up your podcast host, all your podcast directories. And as a podcaster yourself, tons of moving parts
And then
when you
they
first.
change.
Yeah, and then they change. And I just realized like this idea of opportunity cost and people understanding what an hour of their time is worth. And business owners realize like this is not my genius. I shouldn't be doing this. And so we'd look to take as much of that off their plate as possible. And that's why we work with some clients in that capacity, complete done for you. Like anything that's podcast related or has podcast in it, let us just take it off your plate. And you can just kind of see that they're just shoulders relaxed and they just feel very supported. But then I started developing a done with you approach as well. And the done with you is really an opportunity to engage with me. It's a cohort. There's content in a community group. We use School for that as the platform. And then every Tuesday, I have office hours. So whoever's in the group, they connect with me. And sometimes, maybe just one person shows up. So they get like, one-to-one coaching with me, which I normally charge like 500 an hour for. Like they're in the community and they just get, whatever questions they have answered. But it was helpful for me because there are people that are just getting started, solo casters that don't have a big budget, and they just really need some hand holding. And I realized, I know there's a lot of moving parts, and I don't think they realize it. I was just speaking to someone today. She's like, I didn't realize there were so many moving parts with starting a podcast. She thought I thought I was just going to grab my iPhone and we are just going to record and go on Anchor. I'm like, well, I had a kind of, had a reality check with her. And so, she's someone who'd be a good fit because essentially like it's a 12-week cohort. And then I literally handhold them through every step, of the process. They watch the training and then I'm like, okay, let's work on your name. Let's work on your description, like, and everything sequentially so they don't feel overwhelmed. And I think it's been helpful for me to have that approach because I can reach more people.
That's great. And I love how you took your passion of sharing your stories, sharing other people's stories, and then we're also able to make a business for yourself with it too that continues to help other people.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And this is just something I love asking every person now is what is most surprising to you about where things are, business, life? What's most surprising?
I think it's understanding that if you're in business right now, and I look at it from my lens as an agency owner and what would, as a digital content creator, it's just being flexible with understanding how things are changing, especially with regards to like AI and people are getting nervous about like jobs being displaced. And, when we've moved our agency to a lot of AI tools that we use that is actually making the experience better for our clients. But I think it's a function of, people being more authentic and distinguishing their content as being human or originated, if you will, because I think what people are trying to figure out is like, is this AI content? Is this human content? And I think, coming back to the newsletter, if people take more of the initiative to just be more vulnerable and to share their stories, then the audience is going to relate to that, and it's going to make a noticeable difference in terms of what they're seeing elsewhere. Because it's like you see AI images now. Like I'm on LinkedIn, and I can see you obviously know right away, like when images are created by AI nowadays, you can tell, and it's very obvious that people are just kind of dialing it in. So I think anyone who's in the creator space right now, and whether you've been in it for a while or today is your first day, I think just reminding people that it's important to try to be as genuine as possible, because that's going to resonate in the long term.
Right. Harry, I have one more question for you. I mean, I could talk to you for an hour, but I said we'd keep it short. What advice would you give someone who is trying to take that big step to maybe it's create a podcast or a business or just take that step towards what they are feeling passionate about?
I think what's important is to focus on their why, like why they want to do it. If it's a podcast, if it's a business, one of the questions I like to ask students or folks that I'm working with is, if we were having this conversation 12 months from now, what would need to have happened with your progress for you to look back and be satisfied that yes, I've accomplished something, or I've made steps towards my goal. And it's really thinking about that, thinking about the end in mind. And when it's in a podcast, when it comes to a podcast, it could be like, well, that I've launched a show, that I've published, 20 episodes, and that I've interviewed like a dozen people, and that I'm getting visibility and being known for, expertise in my niche. And that's definitely doable. If you're starting a business, like it's, is it getting that first client? Is it, making that first offer, just figuring out where you want to be. Because it'll drive you, because you'll have those ups and downs. And I've been in business myself for 10 years now. This year, it's not for the faint of heart.
Yeah.
Entrepreneurship isn't, you have to be comfortable with failure. There was a ton of stuff I tried before my agency that was very expensive lessons to learn, and even some along the way as I built my agency. And I think it's being comfortable with understanding, I think, resiliency as an entrepreneur, like this ability to like fall down, and it's just really just getting up faster and just be like, okay, at least now what didn't work. Because in the past I would just lay down on the floor and be like, man, I just like wallow in like pity and be like, what? I just spent all this money. I just tried this. It didn't work. Like I must not know what I'm doing. But you have to realize that the entrepreneurship is challenging, and you have to surround yourself with people, get help, find a mentor, find a coach, and try to shorten that learning curve, because there's people that have done what you're trying to do before. Don't try to reinvent the wheel, and if you need help, ask for help, because people can shorten that learning curve for you and get you there faster and help you avoid like the mistakes that they made, which is really important.
I wish I had that advice at 22 about seeking out help. They can get you there faster. Saved a lot of time. Thank you for also mentioning that you did face those failures, because I know for me, I feel like, wow, someone's so successful, but wait, all of this happened first. It really is incredible to get that extra perspective on it. So thanks for sharing that. And Harry, just so great to hear about all that you have going on, and tell everybody where they can find you and follow you.
So to subscribe and follow that newsletter that Kate mentioned, it's harryduran.com, I believe. I think the domain still points there. But if you look on Substack, you can find me on Substack. It's called The Life Worth Living. And if you're looking for help with the podcast, the agency, it's fullcast.co. And there's an intro video there that'll be helpful for you to get started.
And your technology is great. Like your website is top notch. Just all the details are wonderful. So extra kudos to you. Harry, thanks so much. I can't wait to share this with the one person that's listening and the umbrella of everyone who does get to hear from you today, and just through everything you're doing.
Well, thanks again for the opportunity to come on your show and share my story. And I'm grateful that you were able to come on Podcast Junkies and share yours. So make sure you include your interview in this show notes as well, so people can hear that longer form conversation, where it was fascinating to hear what your journey's been like.
Oh, well, thank you. Well, I love that too, because we had such a conversation and I got to learn so much about you during that podcast as well. So episode 315 of Podcast Junkies. And then you've got Vertical Farming Podcast. There's a lot to dive into on harryduran.com. Thanks, Harry. Hey
Thanks so
there,
much, Kate.
Kate
Appreciate
here.
it.
With it being January, it's a time when a lot of us get a renewed energy for health and fitness goals. But if you're feeling overwhelmed by what to do or how to start, then I invite you to check out the 101 series, created by yours truly. As in another part of my life, I am a certified fitness professional. The 101 series breaks down common workouts and classes in 3 one-hour videos to take out the overwhelm that can come when stepping into a workout class or gym and give you the power to work out safely and efficiently. We are all busy. We don't have time to waste on injury or doing exercises incorrectly. Whether you go through one or all 3 of the 101 courses, you will be equipped with a wealth of knowledge, broken down in sensible, easy to digest ways. And you'll have access to the course for as long as you need it, pausing, rewinding as often as you need. From my home to yours, nothing fancy, just you and me, lessening the overwhelm and opening doors for your fitness goals. BeByKate.com/the101 series. That's BeByKate.com/the101 series. Thanks for tuning in. If you found this helpful, a 5-star review, like, or comment means the world to me. And if you found insight in this episode, chances are someone else will too. Share with a friend to give them a boost today. Until next time, I'm Kate Cherichella-Tente, and this was Be the Good with Kate.